Good morrow, good listeners, and welcome to the Shakespeare podcast with me, Koel Chatterjee. Join me today as we embark on a fascinating journey through the history of folklore scholarship, examining how our understanding of magic, fairies, and the broader world of folklore in Shakespeare's plays has deepened over time. One of Shakespeare's richest sources of inspiration came directly from the oral tradition, the age-old tales, myths, and legends that circulated through villages and hamlets across England and beyond. These folk tales, often passed down through generations, were the entertainment, the moral lessons, and the shared cultural touchstones of the day. They featured familiar archetypes: the wicked stepmother, the valiant prince, the mischievous fairy, the star-crossed lovers. And Shakespeare, with his keen ear for a good plot and a compelling character, recognized their power. From the magical transformations in A Midsummer Night's Dream, echoing ancient fey lore, to the dark ambition fueled by prophecy in Macbeth, reminiscent of tales of fate and curses, the echoes of folk tales are everywhere in his plays and sonnets. Even the core premise of King Lear, with its aging monarch dividing his kingdom based on flattery, can be traced back to numerous variants of a widespread folk tale across countries about a father testing his daughter's love. Shakespeare didn't just copy these stories, he elevated them. He took the simple frameworks of the folktale and imbued them with psychological depth, poetic language, and complex human motivations. He transformed familiar characters into unforgettable individuals, and he wove simple narratives into intricate tapestries of drama. Today I'm going to tell you about three pivotal voices, each contributing a unique layer to our knowledge about Shakespeare and the folktale. Thomas Keightley, Charlotte Artese, and John Snodgrass, and their progression from meticulous folklore collection to nuanced literary and cultural analysis, which I hope will illuminate the magical underpinnings of the bard's storytelling. Let's rewind the clock to the early 19th century and meet Thomas Keightley, a pioneering Irish scholar whose monumental work, The Fairy Mythology, illustrative of the romance and superstition of various countries, published in 1828, laid a crucial, almost archaeological foundation for understanding the supernatural. Keightley's primary goal wasn't to analyze Shakespeare's specific use of fairies, but rather to systematically collect, describe, and compare fairy and supernatural beliefs from diverse cultures across the globe. Imagine him as the great archivist of the supernatural, driven by a deep scholarly curiosity. He painstakingly scoured countless written sources, old chronicles, ballads, historical accounts, travelogues, and regional folklore collections from nations like Denmark, Germany, France, Scotland, Ireland, and England. He then classified and presented these narratives not just as quaint stories, but as expressions of deeply held popular beliefs. For instance, Keightley dedicates significant portions of his work to detailing the characteristics of various regional spirits and their interactions with humanity. He meticulously describes the Danish nisser or nisse, often portrayed as small grey-clad house spirits with red caps, who were thought to bring good luck if treated with respect. Perhaps a bowl of porridge left out? But could cause mischief if offended. He also delves into the chilling belief in changeling children, the notion that fairies would abduct human babies and replace them with their own, often sickly or ill-tempered offspring. Keightley would provide detailed examples of accounts where parents suspected a changeling, highlighting the anxieties these beliefs instilled in communities. While Shakespeare's A Midsummer Night's Dream features Oberon and Titania quarreling over a changeling boy, Keightley's work provides the raw ethnographic data, the widespread cultural context, for why such a concept would be immediately recognizable and resonate with an Elizabethan audience. He wasn't interpreting Shakespeare's artistic choices here. He was providing the very bedrock of knowledge about these creatures, the historical and cross-cultural data that future scholars, including himself in his Shakespearean editorial work, would draw upon. His book is filled with countless examples of specific regional beliefs, like the common belief in parts of England that turning one's coat inside out could protect against pixie illusion or bewitchment in the wild. Keightley's contribution to the study of folklore was foundational, establishing it as a legitimate field of academic inquiry. The fairy mythology was highly popular among Victorian folklore researchers and remains a relevant source for those interested in the subject today. Keightley also contributed to Shakespeare scholarship by editing several editions of Shakespeare's plays and poems, and it is highly likely that his extensive knowledge of fairy lore influenced his editing and understanding of Shakespeare. Fast forward almost 2 centuries, and we encounter Charlotte Artese and her insightful 2019 book, Shakespeare and the Folktale. Artese shifts our focus significantly and argues that it wasn't just specific magical beings, but the pervasive influence of the entire folktale tradition, its narrative logic, motifs, and recurring character types that fundamentally shaped Shakespeare's dramatic artistry. She posits that Shakespeare's mind and that of his audience was deeply steeped in an oral storytelling culture where folktale patterns were inherently understood. Artese's work is less about specific fairy characteristics and more about identifying broader narrative structures and archetypal situations that Shakespeare borrowed, adapted, and brilliantly transformed. She illustrates how Shakespeare didn't just pluck individual tales, he absorbed the very essence of how folk tales work as a narrative form. A compelling example Artese explores is the opening of King Lear. She meticulously connects Lear's fateful love test of his 3 daughters, where Lear demands grand declarations of affection and tragically misinterprets Cordelia's simple, honest reply, to the widespread love like salt folktale. In various versions of this ancient tale, a daughter declares her love for her father is as common or as essential as salt, leading to her banishment. The father later realizes the indispensable value of salt and his daughter's simple, honest love during a feast where salt is absent. Artese shows how Shakespeare takes this familiar, even simplistic narrative framework and elevates it into a profound tragedy, exploring complex themes of familial love, justice, madness, and the nature of true value. She reveals how Shakespeare leveraged the audience's inherent understanding of these ancient narrative blueprints to create immediate recognition and emotional resonance. Another potent example Artese highlights is the chilling pound of flesh demanded by Shylock in The Merchant of Venice. While we can trace specific literary sources for this cruel bond, Artese emphasizes that this motif was part of a broader, globally distributed folktale tradition. This meant audiences would have recognized the inherent narrative tension, the moral dilemma, and the terrible stakes of such a bargain long before Shakespeare put it on stage. Artese's contribution is showing how Shakespeare didn't just use folktales, but thought in terms of their structures, building upon a shared cultural vocabulary of storytelling. Finally, we turn our attention to John Snodgrass and his insightful 2022 work, Supernatural Shakespeare, Magic and Ritual in Merry Old England. Like Artese, Snodgrass doesn't just catalogue beliefs or identify narrative structures, he dives deep into how Shakespeare strategically and purposefully deployed magic and supernatural elements to achieve specific dramatic effects, resonate with his audience's fears and fascinations, and deepen the play's thematic complexity. Snodgrass's focus is on the function of the supernatural within the plays themselves, examining Shakespeare's conscious artistic choices. He argues that Shakespeare understood the power of popular belief and masterfully manipulated it for theatrical impact. Consider the iconic three witches in Macbeth. Snodgrass doesn't merely state that witches existed in folklore, as Keightley might provide the background. Instead, he meticulously examines how Shakespeare selectively incorporated and exaggerated specific popular beliefs about witches. Their ability to conjure spirits, deliver ambiguous and fate-tempting prophecies, and manipulate weather through dark rites. He analyzes how their appearance on the blasted heath, their chanting of fair is foul and foul is fair, and their prophetic pronouncements directly drive Macbeth's ambition and illustrate his spiraling moral decay. Snodgrass highlights how the witches' ominous incantations and their seemingly innocuous riddles tap into profound contemporary anxieties about dark arts and preternatural influence, making their presence deeply unsettling and integral to the play's tragic trajectory. He explores how Shakespeare leveraged the audience's existing understanding of these popular superstitions for maximum dramatic and psychological impact, crafting characters that felt both supernatural and eerily familiar. So, what do these three distinct yet interconnected scholarly approaches collectively teach us about Shakespeare and the fantastical? Keightley provided the essential historical and comparative inventory of fairy and supernatural beliefs, giving us the raw material of the pre-modern imagination that Shakespeare had access to. He built the very foundation of folklore studies. Artese then showed us how the deeper structural patterns of ubiquitous folk tales formed the very backbone of many of Shakespeare's narratives, creating a shared subconscious language of storytelling between the playwright and his audience. She reveals the pervasive narrative scaffolding. And Snodgrass demonstrated how Shakespeare, with remarkable artistic intention, specifically and powerfully utilized these magical and supernatural elements from the popular consciousness to craft vivid, resonant, and thematically rich dramatic experiences on stage. He shows us the careful craft behind the magic. Together, their work illuminates Shakespeare not just as a brilliant wordsmith, but as a profound interpreter and master transformer of the enduring magic, myths, and stories that shaped his world and continue to captivate ours. The Bard's enchantment is truly a blend of timeless genius and the age old magic of popular belief. That's all for this episode of the Shakespeare podcast. I'll be back next week to discuss Shakespeare as a character in Sarah Hoyt's Ill Met by Moonlight and Neil Gaiman's Sandman trilogy. If you've enjoyed this episode, please consider rating, reviewing, and sharing my podcast with fellow enthusiasts and Shakespeare nerds. I hope you enjoyed listening to me as much as I've enjoyed talking to you.